The scent of garlic and wine and expensive perfumes saturates the air at Bellini's, thick enough to taste on the back of my tongue as I weave between tables with a tray of dirty dishes balanced against my hip. My feet ache in the required black heels, and the starched white shirt pulls across my shoulders, but I keep my smile fixed, because tips pay my rent, and complaining gets you fired. I have been here 6 months now, the evening shift, Thursday through Monday, and I know every table, every temperamental burner in the kitchen, every way the manager watches the female servers like we are inventory. He needs to protect from theft. The restaurant hums with the low music of wealth tonight, crystal clinking, leather creaking, voices modulated to that particular pitch that signals money and education and power. I am nearly to the kitchen when I notice her. A child sitting alone at table 14 in the corner, maybe 10 years old, with dark curls spilling over the shoulders of a deep blue velvet dress that probably costs more than I make in a week. Her wheelchair is tucked close to the table, small hands folded in her lap, head bent like she is trying to disappear into herself. Something in my chest tightens. Then I hear the laughter from table 12, three women in designer dresses with jewels catching the low light, their voices rising just loud enough to carry. "Look at that," one says, pointing with her wine glass. "Such a shame," another adds. "You would think they would keep her at home." The third woman laughs, a bright, cruel sound. "I mean, really, who brings a crippled child to a place like this?" My hands go cold. The tray wobbles. I set it down on the nearest surface before I drop it. The little girl has gone rigid, her shoulders hunched, and even from here I can see the trembling in her fingers. A tear slides down her cheek, catching the candlelight. She does not look up, does not defend herself, just sits there absorbing their cruelty like she has heard it all before. My heart pounds so hard I feel it in my throat. This is not my table, not my business. I could walk away, finish my shift, collect my tips, and go home to my cramped studio and my student loan statements and my careful, invisible life. But my feet are already moving. I cross the restaurant floor, my heels clicking on the polished wood, and I do not let myself think about consequences until I am standing between the child and those three women with their manicured hands and empty eyes. "Your behavior is disgusting," I say, and my voice does not shake even though everything inside me is shaking. "You need to leave, now." The shock on their faces would be funny if I were not so furious. The blonde one recovers first, her lip curling. "Excuse me," she says. "Do you know who we are?" "I am aware you are bullying a child," I tell her. "That makes you trash no matter what your bank account says." The restaurant has gone silent. I feel every eye on me. The brunette woman stands, her face flushing. "You are just a waitress," she hisses. "We will have you fired for speaking to us like that. My manager will be thrilled to hear why." "Fine," I say, even though terror is crawling up my spine because I need this job, I need every paycheck. "But you are still leaving." They laugh. All three of them. The sound is ugly. Other diners are watching with expressions ranging from shock to amusement to carefully blank indifference. No one moves to help. Then a voice cuts through the noise, deep and cold and absolutely controlled. "That will not be necessary." A man rises from a shadowed booth across the room, and the entire restaurant seems to hold its breath. "Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you." He walks toward us with the kind of control that suggests violence is always an option, but rarely necessary. Each step measured and deliberate, polished Italian shoes clicking against the hardwood floor in a rhythm that feels like a countdown. I notice everything because my brain has gone into that hyper-aware state where terror sharpens every sense. The way his broad shoulders fill out the black suit that probably costs more than my car, the dark hair silvered at the temples suggesting he is maybe 40, the scar that runs along his jawline like someone once got close enough to hurt him and likely did not survive the mistake, and his eyes, gray and cold as winter steel, sweeping across the three women with such absolute contempt they physically recoil. He stops beside me, close enough that I can smell his cologne, something expensive and dark with notes of cedar and smoke, and underneath it something sharper that my hindbrain identifies as danger even if I cannot name it. The women have gone silent, their faces draining of color like someone pulled a plug. I should move. Step aside. Disappear back into my role as invisible service worker. But my legs will not cooperate, and I am frozen between this man and the child, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I worry he can hear it. He does not look at me yet. His attention stays fixed on the three women who were so bold 30 seconds ago, and now look like they want to sink through the floor. Leave, he says, and his voice is quiet, almost gentle, which somehow makes it more terrifying than if he had shouted. Now. They scramble for their purses, knocking over a wine glass in their haste. The sound of crystal shattering seems unnaturally loud. They flee toward the exit without looking back, without asking for their coats, without a single word of protest. Every other diner in the restaurant has found something fascinating about their plates. The silence is suffocating. Then he turns to me, and I forget how to breathe. Up close, he is devastating in a way that has nothing to do with conventional handsomeness and everything to do with presence, with power, with the sense that he could destroy me or protect me with equal ease. His eyes rake over my face like he is cataloging every detail, and I realize with creeping horror that I know this man, or at least I know the name that occasionally surfaces in news reports carefully worded to avoid libel. James Carstairs, the Carstairs family, organized crime, though nothing ever sticks in court. They control shipping, construction, half the unions, and if the rumors are true, things much darker. My mouth goes dry. Your name, he says, and his voice has shifted, still deep but somehow softer, like he has decided I am not a threat. Clara. I manage. Clara Whitmore. He nods once, something that might be approval in the slight tilt of his head. Thank you, Clara Whitmore, he says. Then he moves past me toward the child, and I watch the most extraordinary transformation. His entire face softens, the cold fury melting into something tender and heartbroken as he kneels beside the wheelchair. Sophia, he murmurs, and I realize he is speaking Italian now, low and soothing. The girl launches herself into his arms as much as she can from the chair, sobbing into his shoulder. He holds her carefully, like she is made of glass, one hand cradling the back of her head, and I have to look away from the intimacy of it. When I glance back, Sophia is pointing at me, her tear-streaked face animated. She was so brave, Papa, the girl says in accented English. She told them to leave. James looks at me again over his daughter's head, and the expression in his eyes makes my skin flush hot. Before I can process it, my manager appears, red-faced and sweating, already talking. Miss Whitmore, you need to apologize immediately, he sputters. Those are valued customers, and you had no right. James rises to his full height, which is considerable, and looks at my manager the way someone might look at an insect. Clara is the only member of your staff who showed any decency tonight, he says in that quiet, terrifying voice. If she faces any consequences for defending my daughter, Bellini's will face consequences. The threat hangs in the air like smoke. My manager goes pale, stammers something incoherent, and retreats. The three women are long gone. Other diners study their food with intense fascination. James produces a business card from inside his jacket, expensive paper that catches the light. He hands it to me. His fingers are warm when they brush mine. If you ever need anything, he says, call. The card sits on my nightstand like a live thing, white against the cheap veneer, the embossed letters catching every stray reflection from the streetlight outside my window until it seems to pulse with its own luminescence. I should throw it away, toss it in the trash with the takeout containers and coffee grounds, and pretend tonight never happened. Pretend I never saw the way a child's face crumpled under casual cruelty. Pretend I never felt the electric charge when James Carstairs stood close enough that his sleeve brushed my arm. Men like him are not saviors. They are predators dressed in expensive suits. Their protection just another form of possession. Their gratitude a debt I cannot afford to owe. But every time I close my eyes, I see Sophia's tears, the way her small hands trembled in her lap, the desperate hope in her face when her father held her. I see the transformation in James, the cold fury melting into tenderness so raw it hurt to witness, like glimpsing something sacred I had no right to see. Sleep will not come. I lie in my studio apartment with its water-stained ceiling and temperamental radiator. The sounds of the city filtering through thin walls, voices arguing in the unit above, sirens wailing somewhere distant, the constant hum of traffic that never quite fades. My shift ended 4 hours ago, but adrenaline still courses through my veins, my heart refusing to settle into a normal rhythm. I replay the scene over and over, examining it from every angle, cataloging my stupidity. I confronted wealthy customers over someone else's child. I accepted a business card from a man whose name appears in news articles, carefully worded to avoid lawsuits, whose family tree has roots in violence and corruption going back 3 generations. Jenny cornered me before I left, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from actually understanding the stakes. "You know who that was," she hissed, gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "James Carstairs, the Carstairs family. Clara, they own half this city and the other half is too scared to complain. People who cross them disappear. I told her I just defended a kid, nothing more, but she shook her head like I was already lost. He gave you his card," she said. "That means something. That means you are on his radar now." You do not want to be on his radar. But when I finally drift towards sleep as dawn starts to gray my window, it is not fear that keeps my pulse elevated. It is the memory of his eyes, winter steel softening when he looked at me, the brush of his fingers when he handed me the card, the controlled power in every movement suggesting violence leashed but never absent. It is the sound of Sophia's laughter, bright and genuine, the way she waved at me like I was someone who mattered, someone worth remembering. I wake 4 hours later to pounding on my door, the sound drilling into my skull, and my first thought is that Jenny was right, that accepting the card was acceptance of something far more binding, that I have stepped across a threshold I cannot uncross. My heart hammers as I stumble out of bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes because I never made it to pajamas, and peer through the peephole with my hand shaking so badly I have to grip the doorframe to steady myself. A man stands in the hallway, tall and broad in a dark suit that screams money and muscle, his posture relaxed but alert in the way of someone trained to handle trouble. Not James. Someone who works for James, which might be worse. The lift descends with a mechanical hum that seems too loud in the silent foyer, and I watch Sophia's face transform as she catches sight of me, her dark eyes lighting with a joy so pure it makes my chest ache with something I cannot name, something dangerous that feels like belonging in a place I have no right to belong. "Clara," she calls out, her voice bright as bells. "You came to see me." I cross the marble floor, my cheap sneakers squeaking slightly, painfully aware of how I must look in my faded jeans and clearance rack sweater. But Sophia does not seem to notice or care as I kneel beside her wheelchair, bringing myself to her eye level the way I learned in my training, the way that says I see you as an equal, not someone to look down upon. "I did," I confirm, and her smile widens impossibly further. "Will you stay for lunch?" she asks, the question tumbling out fast like she is afraid if she does not ask quickly I might disappear. "Please say yes. Papa said you might not have time, but I told him you would want to stay. I told him you were nice." Over her head, I meet James's gaze, and the impact of it nearly knocks me backward, those winter gray eyes fixed on me with an intensity that makes my skin flush hot, despite the cool air conditioning, and I see something in his expression that I cannot quite read, something that might be hope or hunger or both. He gives the slightest nod, permission or invitation, I am not sure which. Of course I will stay, I tell Sophia, and she claps her hands together with such unguarded delight that I feel my throat tighten. The next 3 hours unspool like a dream. Sophia is brilliant and funny and so desperately starved for normal interaction that it breaks something in me I did not know was still intact. She shows me her art, watercolors of birds and gardens, her technique surprisingly sophisticated for a 10-year-old. She tells me about the books she is reading, fantasy novels about girls who save kingdoms, and I see the longing in her face when she describes their adventures. Her current tutor is 70, kind but tired, teaching from outdated textbooks and clearly counting the days to retirement. Between Sophia's chatter, I piece together a life of profound isolation, homeschooled because regular school presents security risks, friends non-existent, because what parent wants their child visiting the home of James Carstairs, outings limited to doctor appointments, and the occasional supervised trip to places her father's men have secured in advance. Her mother died 3 years ago, cancer, too fast for even Carstairs' money to stop. The degenerative condition affecting her legs is genetic, progressive, but not fatal, stealing mobility but leaving everything else intact. She loves music, especially piano, though her hands are starting to show the same weakness as her legs. She loves birds because they can go anywhere. She loves stories because in them, she can be anyone. James watches us from a leather armchair near the windows, present but not intrusive. And I catch him staring at me, 6 times, 7, his expression unguarded in a way that makes my pulse stutter. Each time our eyes meet, neither of us looks away immediately, and something passes between us, electric and unwanted, a current I do not know how to break. Lunch is served in a dining room that overlooks gardens so perfect they look painted, and the food is restaurant quality, probably prepared by a private chef, delicate pasta and fresh bread and vegetables that actually taste like something. Sophia chatters through the meal, asking me questions about my life with the unfiltered curiosity of a child who spends too much time with adults. I answer carefully, editing out the loneliness and financial desperation, the studio apartment with its broken heater, and the second job cleaning offices at night that left me exhausted enough to sleep through my worry. James listens like every word I say matters, his attention so complete it feels physical, a weight against my skin. Why education? He asks, his voice low and measured. I hesitate, then admit I love teaching, especially kids who need extra patience, who learn differently, who get overlooked. I stop myself, suddenly worried I have implied something terrible about Sophia. But the girl grins at me and announces that I would be a wonderful teacher, that I explain things in ways that make sense. James goes very still, his body language shifting into something focused and calculating, and when he speaks again, his tone is careful, deliberate. Do you have experience with special needs children? I do, I tell him. From volunteer work during college and internships, I could not afford to turn into real jobs because nonprofit education does not pay enough to cover loans. The conversation shifts then, becomes something else. And James mentions almost casually that Sophia's current tutor is retiring at the end of the month, that finding someone trustworthy is difficult given their circumstances. And he does not elaborate, but I understand perfectly because I am sitting in the home of a man whose name is synonymous with organized crime, whose enemies would love to find a weakness, whose daughter is the most vulnerable target imaginable. He asks, his eyes locked on mine, whether I would consider a position here, teaching Sophia, the pay substantial, the arrangement beneficial for everyone. My mind goes blank with shock, then races through implications at light speed. The 3 days feel like 3 weeks, each hour dragging with a weight I do not want to examine too closely, and I fill the empty spaces with routines that keep my hands busy and my mind contained within safe boundaries that do not include wondering where James has gone or whether the dangers he faces are the kind that end in blood and sirens. I call the number on the card at exactly 9 in the morning on the fourth day, my finger hovering over the buttons for a full minute before I force myself to dial, my heart hammering so hard I can feel it in my throat. He answers on the second ring, his voice low and slightly rough, like he has not been sleeping either. And when I tell him I accept the position, there is a pause that stretches just long enough for me to second-guess everything before his voice comes back warmer, satisfied in a way that sends heat curling through my stomach. He tells me to give notice at my current jobs, that I will start in 1 week, and then he names a salary that is 4 times what I make working myself to exhaustion across 2 jobs, and my breath actually catches audibly enough that I know he hears it. He asks for my address to send over paperwork, and I hesitate because giving him that feels like handing over more than just a location. It feels like opening a door I will never be able to close. But his voice softens, and he promises that I am safe, and that word from his mouth is such a contradiction it almost makes me laugh. Except nothing about this is funny. The paperwork arrives by courier 6 hours later in a leather portfolio that probably costs more than my monthly rent, and inside is a contract so professional and detailed it could have come from any legitimate corporation, complete with non-disclosure agreement and background check authorization. Everything legal and proper, and almost disappointingly normal, like I expected something more obviously sinister. My last week at Bellini's drags, with the particular torture of time that refuses to move, and Jenny corners me every shift with warnings that grow increasingly dire until I finally tell her I have made my choice, and she looks at me like I am already dead, while the other servers watch me with a mixture of fear and envy, like I have been marked by something they cannot decide is fortune or curse. Moving day arrives with Thomas and 2 other men who treat my belongings with a care that seems excessive given that everything I own fits into boxes that take less than an hour to pack. And Thomas explains in his careful professional tone that I will have a suite in the West Wing, staff quarters, but he says it in a way that suggests staff in this house means something different than it does anywhere else. The rooms steal my breath when I first see them, all soft creams and blues with furniture that looks antique and expensive, fresh flowers on the table like someone planned for my arrival, windows overlooking gardens so perfect they seem unreal, and I stand in the center feeling dizzy with the impossibility of my life shifting this dramatically in the span of days. The knock comes while I am still trying to process that this is real, and when I call out, James enters without hesitation, his presence filling the space in a way that makes the generous room suddenly feel intimate and small. He asks if everything is acceptable, and I almost laugh at the inadequacy of that word for rooms that look like they belong in a magazine. But he moves closer with his hands in his pockets, and something in his posture reads as uncertain, almost vulnerable. And he thanks me again, saying Sophia has not stopped talking about my arrival. He pauses, then admits he ran a background check, that I came back clean and exactly who I presented myself to be. And there is something in his tone that sounds almost surprised, like he expected to find secrets, or lies, or the kind of darkness he is used to finding in people. I ask if he expected different, and he smiles slightly, the expression transforming his face into something younger and less dangerous, and says in his world, everyone has secrets before asking about mine. The question hangs between us heavy with implication, and I hold his gaze, telling him I have none worth hiding, and the silence that follows feels charged with all the things neither of us is saying. He nods slowly, then tells me Sophia is waiting downstairs, that dinner is at 6 and I should join them, phrasing it as information, but his eyes make it something else entirely. As he turns to leave, I ask the question that has burned in my mind since he first made the offer, why me? And he stops in the doorway with his back to me and says, because his daughter trusts me, and Sophia's instincts are better than his own. Then he is gone, and I am alone with my racing heart and the knowledge that I have just crossed a threshold I can never uncross. The first week establishes a routine that feels both surreal and natural, Mornings spent with Sophia in the bright conservatory that serves as our classroom where we work through literature and math and science, and the girl is brilliant in a way that makes teaching her less like work and more like exploration. Her mind quick and curious and hungry for knowledge in a way that reminds me why I wanted to teach in the first place. She soaks up everything, asking questions that show real thought, making connections between subjects that surprise me, and I watch her confidence grow with each day, her voice getting stronger when she reads aloud, her hand shooting up eagerly when I pose a problem like she has forgotten to be self-conscious about her intelligence. She talks endlessly during our lessons, sharing opinions about characters in books and theories about historical events, and dreams about futures that seem simultaneously impossible and inevitable. Telling me she wants to be a veterinarian because animals do not care if you can walk, or maybe a writer because stories can take you anywhere. She asks about my life before this, and I edit carefully, leaving out the nights I cried over bills I could not pay, and the loneliness that felt like drowning, and the desperate applications to schools that never called back, giving her instead a sanitized version of struggle that sounds almost noble in retrospect. Afternoons we shift to art and music and physical therapy, and I assist the therapist whose name is Margaret, a kind woman in her 50s who teaches me Sophia's exercises and stretches. And I see the frustration that crosses the girl's face when her body will not cooperate, but also the fierce determination that makes her try again, makes her push through discomfort because giving up is not in her nature. Evenings we eat together, sometimes just Sophia and me, sometimes with James when his schedule allows, and I learn quickly that his presence is unpredictable. Some days he is there for every meal, and other days he disappears entirely, his office door closed with low, dangerous voices filtering through, men in dark suits arriving and leaving at odd hours, tension crackling through the house like electricity before a storm. I never ask where he goes or what he does because I already know enough to understand that ignorance might be the only thing keeping me safe. But I notice everything anyway, the way Thomas and the other security personnel move with military precision, the cameras I spot in every corner, the reinforced doors and bulletproof windows that someone pointed out casually like they were talking about crown molding. At night alone in my beautiful rooms, I should be afraid, should be planning my escape from this gilded cage that houses a monster. But instead, I find myself thinking about James in ways that make my skin flush hot and my breath come short, remembering the way he listens when Sophia reads aloud, like her words are scripture, how he never raises his voice, even when I can see frustration tightening his jaw, the careful distance he maintains from me that feels more like restraint than disinterest. I feel his eyes on me constantly, during dinner when I laugh at something Sophia says, and glance up to find him watching with an expression that makes my stomach flip. In the hallway when we pass, and he presses himself against the wall to avoid even accidental contact. Once in the library, when we both reached for the same book, and our fingers brushed, and electricity shot up my arms so intense I gasped, and he pulled back like I had burned him, and neither of us acknowledged what had just happened. The attraction is impossible and inappropriate and dangerous, and I remind myself of this every single day. But my body does not listen to logic, does not care that wanting him is the kind of mistake that ends in tragedy. One evening, Sophia goes to bed early, exhausted from a particularly intense therapy session, and I head toward my rooms but take a wrong turn in this sprawling house that I still have not fully mapped, ending up in an unfamiliar corridor where voices drift from a partially open door, and I recognize James's voice, but it sounds nothing like the gentle father who reads bedtime stories, cold and lethal, and absolutely certain, as he discusses someone who betrayed him, and the consequences he describes in clinical detail make my blood freeze in my veins. I back away silently, my heart hammering so hard I am sure someone will hear it, and I practically run back to my room where I sit on the bed shaking, because this is who he really is. Not the devoted father, but the ruthless criminal who orders terrible things in the same tone most people use to discuss the weather, and I should leave, should pack my few belongings and disappear before I get pulled deeper into this darkness. But when I think about Sophia's face lighting up when I arrive each morning, I know I will stay. Know I am already in too deep to save myself. The knock comes 20 minutes later, soft and somehow tentative, and when I open the door, James stands there with an expression I cannot read, and he asks if I am well, says I seemed pale at dinner, and I force a smile and lie that I am fine, just tired, watching his eyes narrow slightly, like he knows I am not telling the truth. He studies me for a long moment, and then tells me that if I ever feel unsafe, I can leave, no consequences, no questions. He wants me to know that I have a choice. And the words are clearly meant to reassure, but instead, they confirm that he knows exactly how dangerous his world is, knows what he is bringing me into, and has made the calculated decision to do it anyway, because his daughter's happiness apparently outweighs my safety in whatever moral calculus he uses to justify his choices. Weeks pass, and I fall completely into the rhythm of this strange household, losing track of days in the comfortable pattern of lessons and meals and quiet evenings, and Sophia blooms under the attention in a way that makes my chest ache with something maternal and fierce. The girl laughing more freely and trying harder in her therapy sessions, and talking about future plans with a confidence that sounds less like fantasy and more like genuine possibility. James notices. I can tell by the way he watches us during dinner, his expression softening when Sophia recounts something funny from our lessons, or proudly displays a drawing she completed. And one morning he asks me to join him in his office and my stomach drops, because that tone means something serious and possibly dangerous. I follow him through the house to a room I have never entered, all dark wood paneling and leather furniture and shelves lined with books that look expensive and probably unread, and he gestures to a chair across from his massive desk before settling into his own seat where he looks every inch the powerful, dangerous man he truly is. All sharp edges and controlled strength even in stillness. He tells me that Sophia's doctors have commented on her improved mood at her last appointment, that her physical therapist, Margaret, says she is more engaged and pushing herself harder, and he credits me with the change in a voice that sounds almost uncertain, like he is not sure how to express gratitude without it becoming something else. I deflect automatically, saying Sophia is easy to care for, that any teacher would see the same results with a student so naturally bright and motivated. But James leans forward with his elbows on the desk, and his eyes pin me in place with an intensity that makes my breath catch. He asks why I am really here, says I clearly have the skills to teach anywhere, and could have found a position that did not require moving into the home of a man whose reputation should terrify me. So why did I walk into a world I so obviously fear? And the question is both challenge and genuine curiosity. I meet his gaze and admit that Sophia reminds me of myself at that age, lonely and hungry for connection, and convinced that something about me was fundamentally wrong, and I could not walk away from a child who needed someone to see her as more than her limitations or her last name. James nods slowly and tells me his daughter has not smiled like this since her mother died, and the rawness in his voice cracks something open inside me. So I ask carefully about Sophia's mother, because he has never spoken of her directly, and the girl only mentions her in past tense with a sadness that seems too large for someone so young. His expression shudders immediately, every wall slamming back into place, but after a silence that stretches so long I think he will not answer at all, he says she was the only truly good thing in his life, that she knew exactly what he was and loved him anyway, and cancer took her in 6 months, just 6 months from diagnosis to death, and Sophia was only 7 years old. The grief in his voice is so raw, it feels like witnessing something private and sacred, and my heart twists painfully as I tell him I am sorry. Inadequate words for devastating loss. He looks at me with sudden burning intensity and says I need to understand that he is not a good man, that the things he has done would horrify me if I knew the details, but everything he does now is to protect Sophia, to build walls high enough and strong enough that his enemies can never touch her. I ask if he regrets his choices, and he considers the question seriously, finally saying he regrets that his daughter will grow up marked by his name, that she will always need protection because of the enemies he made before she was born. But the power that endangers her is also the only thing keeping her alive. A trap he built with his own hands that he cannot escape without destroying everything. The vulnerability in his admission steals my breath, and I tell him that Sophia does not see a monster when she looks at him. She sees a father who loves her enough to carry the weight of terrible choices, so she does not have to. His jaw tightens, and he stands abruptly, walking to the window with his back to me. And after a silence that feels charged with everything we are not saying, he thanks me for staying, for caring about his daughter, and his voice has gone rough. I start to leave, but pause at the door and tell him that everyone has darkness inside them. That what matters is not the shadows we carry, but what we choose to protect with the light that remains. And when James turns to look at me, there is something blazing in his eyes that makes the air between us feel electric and dangerous. I flee before I do something foolish like cross the room to him, and that night I cannot sleep, lying awake seeing his face and the naked hunger in his eyes before I ran, telling myself over and over that this attraction is suicide, but my body aches with want that logic cannot touch. Near midnight I hear footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, and they pause outside my door for so long I hold my breath until my lungs burn, but after an eternity they move on, and I release the air in a shaking rush. In the morning James is gone, and Thomas tells me he will be away for 3 days on business he does not specify, and I tell myself the crushing disappointment I feel is inappropriate and unprofessional, but it does not help, does not make the feeling any less real. While James is gone, I focus entirely on Sophia, throwing myself into lesson planning and activities that will keep both of us occupied and prevent me from thinking about the empty chair at dinner or the silence where his presence usually hums, and we work through advanced reading lists I pulled from my own college years, introducing her to poetry that makes her eyes light up with recognition, like she has been waiting her whole life for someone to show her that words can be arranged this way. Sophia writes her own poems with surprising skill, dark and beautiful verses about loneliness and longing that sound far too mature for a 10-year-old. And when she shares one about a bird in a golden cage who has forgotten the shape of the sky, my throat tightens painfully because I understand exactly what she is trying to say without saying it directly. I ask carefully if she feels trapped here in this beautiful house with its high walls and armed guards. And she shrugs in that way children do when they are trying to seem casual about something that hurts, admitting she wishes she could go places, normal places like parks where other kids play, and movies where people eat popcorn and do not worry about being recognized or targeted. The longing in her voice breaks something open inside me, and I make a decision that is probably stupid and definitely outside my authority. Asking Thomas if an outing would be possible, maybe just to a park or museum, somewhere Sophia could experience a piece of normal childhood. He is immediately wary, his professional mask sliding into place as he explains that Mr. Carstairs would need to approve any deviation from established security protocols. But I argue that Sophia needs socialization beyond these walls, needs to see that the world is not just this isolated bubble, no matter how gilded and protected it might be. Thomas studies me for a long moment like he is weighing my intentions, and then makes a call, stepping into the hallway so I cannot hear the details of what sounds like a tense conversation with multiple parties involved. And when he returns, his expression is carefully neutral, as he tells me that James has agreed to a limited outing under strict conditions. My heart leaps at the thought of giving Sophia this gift, even as a small voice reminds me that I should not be this pleased about James trusting my judgment, should not feel this warm satisfaction at the idea that he listened to my request despite being hundreds of miles away, dealing with whatever dangerous business occupies his time. The outing is planned for 2 days from now when James returns, and Thomas explains that there will be multiple security personnel in civilian clothes positioned throughout whatever location we choose, that we will have a 2-hour window maximum, that at the first sign of any threat, we will extract immediately. I agree to everything because watching Sophia's face transform with joy when I tell her makes every restriction worth it. And she throws her arms around my neck and whispers that I am the best teacher she has ever had, that she wishes I could stay forever, and the fierce protectiveness that surges through me feels dangerously close to what a mother might feel, which terrifies me because I know better than to put down roots in soil this poisoned. That night, I lie awake wondering what James will say when he sees me again, whether the hunger I saw in his eyes before he left will still be there or if distance has restored his control, and I tell myself it does not matter either way, even as my body aches with wanting, even as I press my hand against the wall that separates my room from the rest of the house, like I can feel him through stone and distance, like I am already too far gone to save myself from this beautiful, terrible mistake I am making with every day I choose to stay. James returns on the morning of the outing, and I am in the library with Sophia when Thomas comes to tell us he has arrived, and my heart does something stupid and painful in my chest as I hear his voice in the foyer speaking to the housekeeper, low and commanding even in casual conversation. And then he is standing in the doorway looking at me with those gray eyes that seem to see through every defense I have built, and Sophia wheels herself toward him with a squeal of delight that makes him smile in that way that transforms his entire face from dangerous to devastatingly beautiful. He lifts her from the wheelchair for a hug, and she talks rapidly about our plans for the park, about the poems she has written, and the new books Clara has assigned. And he listens with complete attention while his eyes keep drifting to me over her head, holding my gaze for beats too long to be casual. And when he finally sets Sophia back in her chair and crosses the room toward me, I feel like prey watching a predator approach, every nerve ending alive and screaming. He thanks me for arranging the outing, says Thomas told him it was my idea, and Sophia needs experiences beyond these walls no matter how much it complicates security, and his voice has gone soft in that way that makes my stomach flip because it feels intimate, like we are alone instead of being watched by his daughter and his head of security. I tell him I just want Sophia to have a piece of normal childhood, and he studies my face like he is trying to decode something written there, then says that normal is not something his family gets to have, but he appreciates me trying to give his daughter that gift anyway, and the resignation in his voice makes me ache for both of them, trapped in this beautiful prison built from violence and necessity. Thomas explains the security arrangements, and James listens while standing close enough that I can smell him, that scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder, and something uniquely him that makes me want to lean closer, and I force myself to focus on the logistics instead of the heat radiating from his body or the way his hand rests on the back of my chair, not touching me, but close enough that I feel the near contact, like electricity. We leave an hour later in an SUV with tinted windows, Thomas driving and two other security personnel in a separate vehicle, and James insists on accompanying us despite having just returned from 3 days away, saying he will not miss the chance to see Sophia experience something she has wanted for so long. But when he climbs into the back seat next to me instead of sitting in front with Thomas, when his thigh presses against mine in the close confines and he makes no move to shift away, I know his reasons are not entirely paternal. Sophia chatters from her spot near the window, pointing out buildings and people and dogs, her excitement so pure it makes my throat tight. And James watches her with naked love that makes him seem younger and more vulnerable, and I think about how much weight he carries, how every decision he makes is shadowed by the knowledge that enemies would use his daughter to destroy him. And before I can stop myself, I reach over and squeeze his hand where it rests on his knee. He goes completely still, his entire body tensing, and then his fingers curl around mine and hold on like I am the only solid thing in a tilting world. And we sit like that for the rest of the drive, hands clasped between us where Sophia cannot see, neither of us speaking or looking at each other, because acknowledging this would make it real, and we are not ready for real, not yet, maybe not ever. The park is smaller than I imagined, but perfect, tucked between brownstones with old trees spreading shade across playground equipment and walking paths, and Thomas positions his people at strategic points while trying to look casual, though their vigilance is obvious to anyone who knows what to look for. And James lifts Sophia from her wheelchair and carries her to a bench near the swings where she can watch children play, her face transformed with wonder at this simple, normal scene that most kids take for granted. I sit beside them, feeling the weight of James's presence like gravity, his shoulder inches from mine, his attention split between watching his daughter and the perimeter, and something else, some awareness of me that raises goosebumps along my arms despite the warm afternoon sun. Sophia points out a little girl about her age on the swings and asks if she could try, and James tenses immediately, his protective instincts warring with his desire to give her this experience, and I see the calculation happening behind his eyes as he assesses risk and visibility and the dozen ways this could go wrong. I touch his arm without thinking, my fingers light on his sleeve, and tell him I will stay right with her, that Thomas has the perimeter covered, that she needs this moment of joy more than she needs another layer of protection. And James looks at me with something raw and grateful before nodding and carrying Sophia to the swings. He settles her carefully, his hands gentle and sure, and I position myself beside the swing to help stabilize her, while James stands close enough to catch her if needed. And when we start pushing and Sophia laughs, head thrown back with pure delight, I see James's face transform in a way that makes my chest ache because he looks younger and less burdened and almost at peace. We stay like that for 20 minutes, taking turns pushing, and other parents give us curious looks, but no one approaches, because even in casual clothes, James radiates danger, a predator temporarily at rest, but never truly tame. Sophia makes me promise we can come back next week, and James agrees before I can answer, his voice rough with emotion. And when he lifts her back into the wheelchair, she hugs his neck and tells him this is the best day she has had in forever. And I watch his eyes close briefly, like he is in pain and trying to hide it. On the walk back to the SUV, Sophia chatters about everything she saw, while James walks beside me close enough that our hands brush with every third step. And each accidental touch feels deliberate, feels like a question neither of us is brave enough to ask out loud. Thomas holds the vehicle door and helps secure Sophia while James stands beside me on the sidewalk, both of us lingering in the sunlight, and he tells me thank you for pushing him to allow this, that he forgets sometimes that protecting her also means letting her live. And the vulnerability in his admission makes me bold enough to say that she needs experiences worth protecting, not just safety. And James looks at me like I have said something profound instead of obvious. His hand lifts toward my face, his fingers almost touching my cheek, and I stop breathing as the air between us goes electric with want and fear and impossible possibility. But then Thomas clears his throat, and James drops his hand and steps back, the moment shattered but not forgotten, and we climb into the SUV with all the words we cannot say hanging between us like smoke. That evening after Sophia goes to sleep, I find myself restless and unable to settle in my rooms, the walls feeling too close despite their spaciousness, and I wander down to the kitchen thinking tea might calm the strange buzzing energy under my skin that has nothing to do with the outing, and everything to do with the way James looked at me before he left, the way his fingers lingered on mine, the way the air between us feels thick with things neither of us dares to name. The kitchen is empty and dark except for the light over the stove, and I am filling the kettle when I hear footsteps behind me and turn to find James standing in the doorway still wearing the clothes he left in this morning. His shirt rumpled and tie gone and stubble darkening his jaw, and my heart does that stupid, painful thing again because he looks exhausted and human and more dangerous than ever. He seems surprised to see me, asking what I am doing awake at this hour, and I gesture uselessly at the kettle and say I could not sleep, my voice coming out breathier than I intend. And he nods slowly and moves into the kitchen with that predatory grace that makes my stomach flip, telling me he had the same problem, that he drove back tonight instead of waiting until morning, because he could not stop thinking about tomorrow, about whether he is making the right choice allowing Sophia this risk. I tell him without thinking that he is, that she needs this, that living in fear is not living at all. And he looks at me with such raw intensity that I have to grip the counter behind me to stay steady, and he says he knows I am right, but everything in him screams to lock her away where nothing can hurt her, where his enemies cannot reach her, where the world cannot be cruel, and I hear the agony in his voice and understand suddenly that his control is not coldness, but the only thing holding back his terror. He moves closer, and I should step back, but I do not, cannot, will not. And he reaches past me to get a glass from the cabinet, his arm brushing mine, his body so close I can feel the heat of him. And when he does not move away after retrieving the glass, I know this is a choice, a question, a test of my courage or my stupidity. The kettle begins to whistle, and neither of us moves to turn it off. Just stand there in the dim kitchen with barely an inch between us, and James lifts his free hand and finally touches my face, his fingers tracing my cheekbone with devastating gentleness. And he tells me in a voice rough with restraint that I should go back to my room, that I should stay far away from him, that he is trying very hard to be honorable, and my presence makes honor impossible. I turn my face into his palm without deciding to, my lips brushing his skin, and tell him I do not want honor, I want truth, and something breaks in his expression, some last defense crumbling, and he sets down the glass and frames my face with both hands, and kisses me like a man drowning, like I am air and salvation and destruction all at once. The kiss is everything and nothing like I imagined, fierce and controlled and desperate all at once. And I open to him without hesitation, because this has been inevitable since the moment our eyes met in that restaurant, since I chose to step between danger and his daughter, since I walked into his world and decided to stay despite every rational voice screaming to run. His hands slide from my face into my hair, and I grip his shirt and pull him closer, needing the solid reality of him after weeks of careful distance and stolen glances and touches that ended too soon. And when he groans low in his throat, the sound vibrates through my entire body and sets every nerve ending alight. He walks me backward until my spine hits the counter and presses against me, and I feel the evidence of his want hard against my hip. And the knowledge that I affect him this way, that controlled, dangerous James Carstairs is coming undone because of me, sends a rush of power through my veins that makes me bold enough to bite his lower lip. He pulls back just enough to look at me, his pupils blown wide and his breathing ragged, and asks if I understand what I am starting, what it will mean if we cross this line, that there will be no going back to professional distance once he has me. I tell him I crossed the line the day I accepted his offer, that I have been his since the moment I saw him kneel beside his daughter, and something feral flashes in his eyes before he lifts me onto the counter in one smooth motion and steps between my thighs. His mouth moves to my throat, and I arch into him, my hands finally free to explore the body I have been watching for weeks, the hard muscles of his shoulders and back, the strength barely leashed beneath expensive clothes. And I feel his hand slide under my shirt, palm hot against my ribs, thumb brushing the underside of my breast. The kettle is still screaming behind us and neither of us cares, lost in the taste and feel of each other, and I wrap my legs around his waist to pull him impossibly closer, when suddenly he goes rigid, his entire body tensing, and he tears himself away from me with visible effort. I reach for him confused and hurt, but he catches my wrist gently, his chest heaving, and says, "We cannot. Not like this. Not in his kitchen where anyone could walk in. Not when he has wanted this so badly that he will not ruin it by taking me against the counter like he cannot control himself." The rejection stings until I see his face, the war between hunger and restraint playing out in his expression, and he tells me I deserve better than stolen moments in the dark, that if this happens, it will be because I choose him fully knowing all the consequences, not because we lost control in a moment of weakness. He steps back and adjusts himself with a grimace that would be funny if I were not aching and empty and desperate, and he turns off the screaming kettle with shaking hands and tells me to go to my room before his control breaks entirely, and I slide off the counter on unsteady legs and force myself to walk away, even though every cell in my body screams to stay. At my door I look back and find him watching me with such naked longing that I almost run back, but he shakes his head slightly, And I understand this is his way of protecting me, of giving me space to choose clearly. And I slip inside my room and lean against the door with my heart pounding and my lips swollen and the taste of him still on my tongue, knowing that tomorrow everything will be different, because we have finally admitted what has been building between us since the beginning, and there is no pretending anymore that this is just a job, or that I am here only for Sophia, when the truth is, I am falling for a man whose world could destroy me. I wake the next morning to sunlight streaming through the windows, and the memory of James's mouth on mine burned into every nerve, and I lie there for long minutes, just staring at the ceiling and replaying every second of that kiss, the taste of him, the desperate strength in his hands, the way he looked at me like I was something precious and dangerous all at once. When I finally force myself up and into the shower, I catch sight of my reflection and see the evidence of last night written on my body, my lips still slightly swollen, a faint mark on my throat where his mouth lingered, and heat floods through me so intensely I have to brace against the tile. I dress carefully in clothes that feel suddenly too revealing, even though they are the same professional outfits I have worn for weeks, hyper aware of my body in a way I was not before. And when I go downstairs for breakfast with Sophia, my heart pounds with anticipation and nervousness about seeing him again. But James is not at breakfast. Thomas mentions he left early for a meeting in the city and will not return until evening, and I tell myself the crushing disappointment is ridiculous, that I should be grateful for time to process what happened, to decide what I really want, but all I feel is the absence of him like a physical ache. Sophia chatters through breakfast about the aquarium trip, already planning what we will see first, and I focus on her excitement and try not to watch the door hoping he will appear. We spend the morning on lessons, but I am distracted, stumbling over explanations I could normally give in my sleep, and Sophia notices, asking if I am feeling well. I lie and say I did not sleep much, which is true enough, and she accepts this with concern that makes me feel guilty because I am supposed to be the adult here, the professional, not someone coming undone over a kiss in the dark. Lunch comes and goes, still no James. I take Sophia out to the gardens for her therapy exercises and spot Thomas conferring with two other security men near the gate. Their expressions serious, and unease prickles down my spine because I have learned to read the rhythms of this household, to sense when something is wrong. Thomas catches my eye and walks over, his face carefully neutral, and tells me Mr. Carstairs called to say he will be delayed, that we should not wait dinner for him, that everything is fine. But I hear what he does not say, see the tension in his shoulders, and I know everything is not fine. I ask if James is in danger, and Thomas hesitates before saying, Mr. Carstairs can handle himself, which is not a denial. And fear claws up my throat because somewhere between taking this job and teaching his daughter and kissing him in the kitchen, I have become invested in his survival in a way that terrifies me. The afternoon drags endlessly. I try to keep Sophia engaged with her lessons, but she senses my distraction and finally asks outright if I am worried about her father, and the directness of the question catches me off guard because I have been trying so hard to maintain professional boundaries, to pretend my concern is merely appropriate worry for my employer, rather than the gut-wrenching fear that something might happen to the man I kissed less than 24 hours ago. I tell her honestly that I am worried, and Sophia reaches across the table to pat my hand with a wisdom far beyond her 10 years, saying her father always comes home, that he has people who protect him, that I should not be afraid. But I hear the uncertainty beneath her reassurance, see the way her eyes flick to the window like she is also waiting and watching, and I realize this is her normal, this constant low-level terror that one day he might not come home, and rage fills me that any child should have to live like this. We abandon lessons early, and I suggest we bake cookies, something normal and domestic and distracting, and Sophia lights up at the idea. In the kitchen, we make a mess of flour and chocolate chips, and for a while I lose myself in her laughter and the simple pleasure of teaching her to cream butter and sugar. The cook watches us with amusement and does not interfere, even though we are clearly invading her territory. The cookies are in the oven when Thomas appears in the doorway, his phone in his hand and his expression carefully neutral in a way that makes my stomach drop. He says Mr. Carstairs is 20 minutes out and asks if we can have dinner ready. And the relief that crashes through me is so intense I have to grip the counter to stay upright. Sophia squeals with joy and asks if we can eat in the dining room, the formal one we almost never use. And Thomas smiles and says he thinks that would be nice. The next 20 minutes pass in a blur of activity. The cook prepares James's favorite meal. Sophia insists on setting the table herself, directing me on where each piece of silverware should go with endearing seriousness. I change into a dress without really thinking about it, something soft and blue that I have not worn yet, and when I catch my reflection, I see the hope and fear written plainly on my face. I hear the car in the driveway and my heart lurches. Sophia is already rolling toward the front entrance. I follow more slowly, trying to compose myself, trying to remember how to breathe. The door opens, and James walks in, and I take in everything at once. The blood on his knuckles, the torn sleeve of his jacket, the exhaustion etched in every line of his body, and the way his eyes find me first before they find his daughter. He looks at me like I am water in a desert, and he is dying of thirst. And then Sophia reaches him, and he breaks the gaze to kneel and embrace her. And I watch him transform from the dangerous man with blood on his hands to the gentle father who murmurs reassurances in Italian while his daughter clings to him. And I understand with terrifying clarity that I am in love with both versions of him, the monster and the man. And there is no going back from this. Dinner unfolds with a surreal quality. The three of us seated at the grand table with candles flickering between us, and James has showered and changed into clean clothes, but I can still see the shadow of violence clinging to him, the careful way he moves like his body aches, the distant look that occasionally crosses his face when he thinks no one is watching. Sophia fills the silence with chatter about our day, the cookies we baked, the math problem she finally solved, and James listens with apparent focus. But I catch him looking at me over her head, his eyes holding questions and promises, and something raw that makes my pulse skip. When Sophia finally winds down, yawning between sentences, James suggests she get ready for bed early, and she protests but not very hard, exhaustion evident in the droop of her shoulders. I offer to help her with her nighttime routine, and she accepts, hugging her father goodnight with extra fierceness, and I see his arms tighten around her, his eyes closing like he is memorizing the moment. Upstairs, I help Sophia into her pajamas and through her bathroom routine, and she asks me quietly if I was really scared when her father was gone, and I tell her the truth, that I was terrified, and she nods like this is both expected and appreciated. She says her mother used to get scared too, that sometimes she would sit by the window for hours waiting, and I hear the weight of memory in her voice, and understand that Sophia has spent years learning to manage fear that no child should have to carry. I tuck her into bed and read her favorite story, and halfway through her eyes drift closed, her breathing evening out into sleep. I sit there for a moment just watching her, this brave, fragile girl who has somehow become central to my world, and I think about the cage she lives in, golden and protective and suffocating all at once. When I finally leave her room and close the door softly behind me, I find James waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, and the sight of him there in the dim light makes my breath catch, because there is no pretense now, no daughter to soften the intensity between us, just the two of us and everything unspoken rising like a tide. He asks if Sophia went down easily, and I confirm she did, and then silence stretches between us, heavy with possibility. He pushes off the wall and moves closer, and I should step back, maintain distance, remember every reason this is impossible. But I stand frozen as he stops inches away, close enough that I can see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the fading bruise along his jaw I had not noticed before. He tells me he should not have left things the way he did after the kiss, that he spent 3 days trying to convince himself to stay away from me, that he failed entirely. His voice is rough, almost angry, but not at me, at himself, at the situation, at the want that neither of us can seem to control. I ask him what happened today, where he went, what danger found him, and he hesitates before saying, "There are things he cannot tell me, will never tell me, because knowledge is its own kind of danger in his world." But he promises that he is handling it, that we are safe, that he will always keep us safe, and the fierceness in his voice when he says us, including me in that circle of protection, undoes something in my chest.